Do you ever feel like your notes are working against you? You highlight, you underline, you write everything down, and yet you still can't remember when it's time to recall the information. Your mind just simply goes blank. And I've been there too. I have tried every kind of note-taking that you can imagine in every kind of notebook to help me get my PhD, to do deep study for the many memory books that I've written, the many articles on learning, and the interviews that I've prepared for with some of the world's sharpest learners. And I mean, I just got piles and piles of notebooks. And throughout this time, I've discovered something very, very powerful that's going to help you. The most popular note-taking methods often fail far too many of us. Not because those methods are broken. They do work for some people. But often, they just weren't necessarily built for every kind of brain. And if you're watching this and struggling to get the maximum recall and understanding, comprehension from the notes you're taking, those other note-taking methods probably don't work for your brain either. So today, in this deep dive training, I'm going to show you 5 unconventional techniques, at least they're unconventional to me, that changed how I read, learn, and remember. And keep in mind, I learned a lot of these so-called conventional memory techniques while I was at university, one of the best universities in Canada. And I've also taught at Rutgers University and taught note-taking. And I taught note-taking at the University of Saarland as well for a little while. And I've just seen a lot, right? So we're going to go into that experience and what I've come up with for a variety of ways to remember better and to comprehend better and also to be more creative. Plus, I'm going to reveal a powerful mental method that almost no one talks about. It's ancient, it's invisible, we might say, and it might just change the way you think forever. So let's get started with one of my favorite techniques that I wish I would have learned to use sooner. You see, I used to write really long sentences in lectures, trying to actually copy what the professors were saying. And then, of course, I would forget everything because I couldn't actually write, even if I knew Greg shorthand or something like that. Like, there's no way I would keep up with the speed of some of my lecturers. I did have some slower lecturers here and there, but overall they were really quite fast and passionate, and I loved that. So one thing that I started to do is I would draw images in my notes, either on individual cards or in my notebooks that I carried to lectures, or when just listening to audio recorded lectures, would really take the time to draw little pictures. And so, for example, when I was studying the International Phonetic Alphabet in a linguistics lecture almost 2 decades ago now, I was really having a hard time understanding the charts and diagrams that were on the screen and that were in the textbooks and so forth. So I started to just do little drawings to help my brain process the symbols involved. So I had, for example, a coffee cup next to the I symbol, and that was enough to trigger later instant recall that this I sound was meant to be E specifically as a sound in the word beans. And there's another symbol in there that helps me remember that it's a long syllable as opposed to a short one. So that's one simple way of not trying to write out any of the words involved, but just simply make an image that made sense to me. And I've done that in many, many different ways to help with learning languages, to help with being able to understand logical symbols, for example, in dialatism, which is a non-classical logic. The beautiful, beautiful, one of the most beautiful things that I've ever studied, actually, and it's really been helpful to me, but I wouldn't have been able to remember those symbols any other way, so it's through visual note-taking. And, of course, this isn't the only way that I've taken notes, and I'm not talking about just having one way to take notes. The point is that rather than writing in prose, which in so many circumstances takes way too much time, it's trying to translate what it is into simple images and then quickly getting them out on a piece of paper. You do not have to be an artist. And if you look at my examples, I am certainly not an artist in any way. I'm just a learner who has come to really, really like visual anchors, not keywords, not sentences or paragraphs. I do like keyword sentences and paragraphs, but this is one of the unconventional approaches that has helped me a lot. And I found out later that medieval scholars and monks used visual illustrations all the time to help them stay focused. And this is in a book by Jamie Kreiner called The Wandering Mind. So I highly recommend this. You'll see examples in this book where she shows some of the visual notes that they injected into the texts and the various ways that it was helpful for them. But you don't have to be a monk to benefit from this skill. Just start incorporating quick sketches. And other visual elements can be stick figures, arrows, little symbols. Maybe you invent some symbols for yourself, etc. But one thing to consider is that I'm not talking about mind mapping. I personally don't use mind mapping at all for note taking, although I know some people do. I have, however, talked a lot on this channel about how I use mind mapping for creative projects and for better memory, such as combining mind mapping with another technique you may be familiar with called the memory palace technique. So if you're new here and you want to join my mission to raise all ships by helping people around the world learn faster and remember more, and have the robots recommend the mind mapping and memory palace training that I have for you, get subscribed, enable notifications, and for the love of memory, hit that thumbs up so our robot overlords never forget the glorious role of human computation and mental note-taking that really helped us give birth to the AI that's forcing us to now need faster and better methods of taking notes than ever before. Now, you've probably seen this style of outlining before, where you make a dash and then you write down the point, and then you indent, and then you have a subpoint, and you may use numbers or arrows, etc. And you can do it on the computer or you can do it by hand. And I've done it a lot by hand. I don't mind having basic notes with dashes at all in a linear format. And I do use basic simple pages to do that from time to time, depending on the goal. But the twist is that I just simply don't trust these notes, because I am using keywords and short little sentences, and all of these indentations, they're following the logic as I'm listening to a lecture or as I'm writing out from a book, but it can get confusing later. So one of the number one things to do is leave space for summaries. And if you can, if you're going to a public lecture that isn't being recorded, make sure that you get permission to record it so you can listen back after and follow your notes, and then rewrite your notes in a different order that makes sense for you. Now, the number one thing about rewriting notes that I have found being very, very important is to rewrite those notes on index cards. Why? Because when you write in a dash and indent format, you're locking those notes typically in a linear top-down format and on pages that go from front to back. And then you have to constantly go through those pages forward and back, or if it's on a screen, you have to scroll up and down, and it can just be very, very frustrating when you can't find those notes quickly. But what these index cards do is they not only promote better memory as such, but then it makes it easier to find those notes and move them around and put them in different orders. And you'll remember more because of the role of handwriting instead of typing, and multiple studies confirm this. But also you have a bit of focus and you have a bit of friction when you're using cards, because you have to think more about how you're going to get your brain to use this smaller space to put these notes in a way that you're going to be able to combine in different ways and then put them back in the original order. So I can go on and on about this. There's a lot of details in the world of Zettelkasten, it's called, and you can mark your cards in various ways, use symbols, use visual notes on those cards to help them connect more in your mind. But the point is that using the little cards forces your brain to think, not just transcribe, not just to copy. And that's where deeper learning and better memory starts. Very, very powerful. And if you want to know more, I have a whole video on the Zettelkasten technique, and I'll have the link in the description for you. Now, you may have heard of SQ3R, which is a question-driven method, and I'm going to add a little nuance to it. But if it's new to you, it is a survey, question, read, recite, and review. That's the standard model. And it actually comes from World War II. I think it was Francis P. Robinson that came up with it. And he was helping the soldiers in the 40s read better. Now, to go much deeper on this method, I mean, what does survey mean? Well, there's the version in the original method, but then there's also what I would do to survey. And one of those things is to learn how to prime books. And the way I prime, very briefly, is to typically read the index first. Really just scan through it, see what highlighted little ideas come up that I already know, so that I'm literally seeing the percentage, let's say, of things I'm familiar with. And then if it's something I'm super familiar with, I'll just scan through that part of the book and see what are a couple of things that the author has to say about those things I already know. So if it's Aristotle or whoever, some philosopher I already know, Nietzsche, etc., I'll just go through those parts and survey what's going on there and already just start to form questions in my mind that I want to ask. And so those questions really can be all kinds of things. And we could go on and on all day about really optimizing your questions, but the goal should be to always practice the practice of asking better and better questions. So you don't want to get to the end and think like, well, what did I just read? But more detailed questions while you're reading. So one thing that you can do is practice what I sometimes call a hermeneutics of suspicion. Now, I got that from somewhere else, but when I used to teach this technique to students at Rutgers, for example, how to read better, I would say, be very suspicious of the text all the time. Why is the author saying this? What is their agenda? What do you think they might be leaving out? They know what it is they're leaving out, but they're leaving it out on purpose. And you kind of are like a detective, and you're interrogating each and every little detail. But you can also ask other kinds of questions, like, how would I explain this to a much younger version of myself? What are some analogies and images and metaphors that fit this concept? There's many, many more questions, and if you want to see a list of them, you can just search up magnetic memory method and note-taking, and you'll see not just more example questions, but more details about how elaborative questioning in combination with making these images that we've been talking about in your notes, but also images in your mind, is going to boost memory, and it's going to boost more comprehension, because this deep encoding is actually something your brain craves. But a lot of people read passively, and then that means that their notes are taken passively. But if you're a deep learner, or you want to become one because you're sick of swimming in the shallow end of the learning pool, just start asking better questions and ask yourself, what is a better question than the question that I'm asking now? And ultimately, you could look at all the example questions in the world, but you need to develop your own theory and your own system of asking better questions. And one way you'll do that is by starting to sketch these little diagrams that we talked about before, or these little illustrations, cartoons, stickmen, whatever it is, because you're going to be asking, how can I illustrate this in a way that I can recognize what I'm saying at a glance? Or even better, you'll use the memory technique that I'm going to offer you shortly. But first, I want to talk about flow-based note-taking, because sometimes we get so in our heads, we're trying to work it out in our minds, but what we really need to do is just open the water faucet and let a little trickle out. Or sometimes we just need to let the fire hose escape. And that's what just being in flow is all about. So I carry around these small little notebooks, and I dump thoughts into them freely. Sometimes I'm more structured, but really it's just I'm studying something, reading a book, and it's just like, what is this? And I'll ask the questions and try to answer them. Or I'll take my research notes, quotes, story seeds for little ideas, even dreams that I've remembered, and just let it all go into the notebook as messy as possible. Well, maybe not always as messy as possible, but just don't interrupt the flow. Capture thought in motion. And because you're doing it by hand, you're going to remember more of your ideas. But you got to practice this over time, etc. The point is just put aside the idea of organization, perfection, all of that sort of stuff, because you can always read it later and either copy the best possible notes into other journals or onto your cards. Now, one thing that I corrected myself with just now is, well, maybe don't be super sloppy, because I have in some of these journals a real hard time decoding some messages that I thought I would be able to read later. A while ago, actually, I had to buy a magnifying glass, not only because I'm getting a little bit older and things are harder to see, but I was trying to decode some information that I had brain dumped that I'd learned about bears, and this notebook even says bears on the side. I was working on a story about bears and so forth, and I just couldn't read what I had written there. So I got this. This helped. But sometimes I just think, wow, maybe I could have gone a little bit slower. But I don't want to get into perfectionism and so forth. Your mileage may vary. I'm just saying there's no perfect way to do this. But I try now to have a lot more balance when I take notes. Now, this one is going to be a technique you got to experiment with and make sure you have a backup, such as a recording of a lecture. But I used to doodle a lot when I was listening to lectures. And it wasn't because I was bored. It was because, I'm a pretty high energy person. My mind is constantly going. And if I'm not doing something with my hands, I just get a little bonkers sometimes. So doodling keeps me grounded, especially when the lectures are really dense or they're very, very slow. And as you know, I have found that just taking notes in a verbatim way just didn't work for me. I couldn't catch up, and then I wouldn't be able to read what it was that I wrote. And just writing keywords also, what was this little thing that I said here? It just doesn't work. So rather, what I would do is I would have a recording and take notes, and then when the speaker is going off on tangents or whatever they're doing, I will start to draw, just based on, I took a course from Riven Phoenix about drawing, and I would work on drawing from memory based on the formulas, and I still do to a little extent nowadays. And, I've got an example for you on the screen of when I was studying some music theory, really refreshing musical theory, and, the teacher would go off on all these long tangents, and so I would doodle and just wait until there was another thing to take an explicit note on. So this is about being present with the notes. And I've done so much doodling. These notebooks are filled with lots and lots of little doodles and strange labyrinths that I used to draw and so on. But those things got me through some really boring lectures. And when I want to hear something on YouTube or what have you, I just sit there and I draw something else, and I wind up retaining a lot of information that way. And there's studies in the science that contradict each other. There's one that says that doodlers remembered 29% more than non-doodlers, and they just had them get on phone calls. And so the test group that was asked to just make little random drawings, they remembered that much more than those who didn't. But there are other studies that contradict this when it's in a learning environment and so forth. So I highly recommend that you experiment with this. Rather than trying to capture every idea that the professor is talking about, doodle so that you actually can absorb what they're saying. Let your pen move while your brain listens. But if you're going to experiment with this and you have any concern whatsoever, ask permission to make your own recording. And these days, most lectures are recorded, but the problem is that it can take days or weeks or maybe even months before that recording appears in a place that you can download it. So if you're secure that you have your own recording, then you can be free to take notes in keywords when you want, in prose sentences when you want, but also just doodle. And this is so key because often there are times when there's literally nothing to write, but the surrounding information, the context, is still important to hear and to process. And, very, very well acknowledged learning experts like Barbara Oakley talk about the importance of diffuse thinking. Taking a break from just constantly translating things through note-taking consumption, right? Allowing yourself to rest and listen. But if you're, fidgety like me, now you have a strategy, which is just as simple as doodling while you're listening. The other thing that you can do is learn the memory palace technique, which is essentially a way of taking familiar spaces, creating little journeys like Hansel and Gretel leaving breadcrumbs, and then every little detail that's on your index cards, you can place them along those journeys and think back to where they were and go, in the corner, I have this image of, say, Captain Crunch, and he's helping me remember a historical date. So that's a very, very powerful thing. The other thing about index cards and memory palaces is they allow you to do a form of space repetition that is not boring, that is not in an app, and that is not just on index cards alone. It can be very, very exciting. It's a little bit challenging, but if you learn how to do it right, which is what I teach in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, you're going to have a great adventure, and you're going to remember more, and you're going to come to understand more. So, with thanks to everyone for all your amazing comments on this channel over the years, thank you for being subscribed, and thanks for those thumbs up. There's one more method I haven't shown you, and I call it the invisible notebook. It doesn't require pen or paper. You don't even need a desk. It's an ancient approach, it's purely mental, and it helps you take notes inside of your mind without necessarily using a memory palace, although it has a relationship to the memory palace technique, and then you can retrieve them without even flipping a page. Very, very few people use it today, but it was used quite a bit during the Renaissance, or a version of it. I've changed it a bit. And the Renaissance was a period where learners changed the world, and we can still benefit from their techniques, especially in today's rapidly changing world where many people, their lives are lacking a compass of meaning because they keep forgetting so much information. And so this technique could be the missing piece for you if you're a deep learner who wants to go further. So to learn it, I've put together a special resource, the Invisible Notebook, that will help you know exactly what to do and how to do it. And it's free, and you'll find your link beneath this video. Before we go, one last suggestion. Note-taking is really just more than keeping track of ideas. It's more than fighting the scarcity of time. It's about making the knowledge yours. Don't settle for what the apps offer, for what the learning gurus tell you. Ask questions. Ask questions even about me. What am I not saying? And experiment with what might be between the lines. Adapt. Combine. Never settle for just being a student. You're a system builder. You're an architect of your future. And you can build more than you might think is possible, one note at a time. And I'm learning right there with you. So let me know in the comments which method you're going to try first today. And remember to check out the Invisible Notebook technique. I have put together a video that is exclusive. This changed everything for me. I've been learning and remembering more than ever before. And as I age, things do get more challenging. So I'm so glad that I learned it soon enough so that I can spend the rest of my life exploring it and benefiting from it. So grab that, and if you want some inspiration, something that inspires me so much, it's not free from criticism. It's not something that, we might do today in our world, but it will help your brain and your memory remember more if you at least know about it, and if you think about it in its historical context and what it might help you do better in today's world. Stick around after you grab the Invisible Notebook and watch or listen to my training on Thomas Jefferson's secret to learning anything deeply next.